Hi, it's Scott McArthur here. I'm joined today by the one and only Jon Ingham. Now, Jon is what I truly consider an HR guru. Not only has he written, how many books have you written, Jon?
Two.
Two good books, both of them over there on my shelf. One of them signed. You need to sign the other one. And but not only that, he has travelled and worked all over the world as an HR consultant and professional. So, welcome to my channel, Jon. Nice to see you.
Great to be here, Scott.
I thought it would be really good just to have a riff off each other for an hour, if you've got an hour or half an hour, how long as you've got, Jon.
Yeah, as you wish.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling not isolated, but I need to speak to more people now rather than the normal Zoom crowd, which is terrific, and I really appreciate them. So I'm not having a go at them, but it's good to speak to somebody with another perspective. So I hope you don't mind me getting therapy from this as well as getting
no, whatever I can do, Scott.
And I thought it would be interesting for us to just reflect on where we think between us, because we're two guys that have worked in the HR space for probably more years than we want to.
Yep.
And I thought it'd be nice for us just to talk about it in terms, like, for example, Boris talking on Sunday about everyone will be flooding back to city centres, and there's all sorts of things flying around the internet about the future of human resources. I wanted to talk to you about that, and I know you've written about it, and I'd love you to talk about that because I think the people who look at my channel would like to know about it.
Wonderful. And it sounds really good, and look forward to some of your other videos as well. I think we've talked previously about Simon Sinek, so I'm particularly looking forward to your video views on his perspectives too.
It's interesting because he's now only 1 degree away from me. I've got a friend who's a friend of his.
Okay.
So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to end up having a pint with this guy one time, and I better watch what I say. But it's kind of relevant that as a starting point, because one of the things that I have been amazed by, and I mean, genuinely almost shocked by, Jon, I'm not kidding, is if you go onto YouTube and you look for HR thinkers on YouTube, there aren't any. I mean, there are a few, but there are virtually none. And that vacuum is filled by people like Simon Sinek who've never had a job, and people like Daniel Pink and these guys. And I find it really surprising. I mean, there was a CIPD list of top HR YouTubers.
Right.
None of them had more than 150 followers.
Okay. I must admit, I've never done that much there. So yeah. I'll add it down to my list.
I think between you and I, it's a bloody big opportunity. I really do. I mean, you have a look, Jon. You'll find there is virtually, as you'd expect, there's lots of recruitment companies, right? That's normal. There's none of them doing. They're doing a good job in their own area. They're good at recruitment. And in fact, I've got a friend of mine, Ross Cunningham, who's got one, and it's pretty good. But there's no sort of thinking stuff going on there. Now, maybe there's not a market for it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I mean, I have been fairly big on social media for some time, less so recently. In fact, I've not done anything at all for 6 months because I've been focused on other things. But yeah, I don't know. I think don't you? So back in the early days of social media, I tried doing a podcast at one point, and I don't know. I'm better at writing. Audio, just about okay. Video, I can get there with a little bit of practice and focus. But certainly like the way that Twitter and LinkedIn and you as well. I admire your ability to hold your phone steady on a stick, presumably as you're walking through the forest. I don't know. I just never felt that comfortable doing that sort of thing, which but you're absolutely right. I mean, regardless of how many HR people are on YouTube, clearly it is a increasingly popular medium that people are using. So I suppose whether or not I feel comfortable doing it, if that's where people are hanging out, that's where I should be.
Well, another colleague, do you know Deborah Cadman?
I don't think.
Deborah's lovely, and she's a former HR director at Capgemini, and her and I did some work together with the board there about 8 years ago or so, and we've been in touch with each other ever since. And Deborah won't mind me saying, but she tried to create a sort of, I guess, an HR mastermind type thing.
Right.
And she did a bloody good job, but she couldn't get HR people to sign up. And I wonder, I mean, it's not scientific sample, John, and neither is my research on YouTube, you know, but I just wonder if there's a gap somewhere. Because, for example, if you look at the CIPD YouTube channel, they turn their comments off. So there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
And then you go into the LinkedIn groups, and there's none of them are active. But there's lots of the people trying to sell you stuff, but they're not active. And I'm starting to worry about it. Because you remember when you and I first came across each other, I think it's because we were both blogging, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Because you were either the first or second person start in the UK, and I was third. So I was learning rapidly from you in my early days. Yeah,
I think you took me over significantly. But where did that go? Is there still a vlogging? Sorry, there's so many new words, I keep getting them mixed up, John. Is there still a blogging community? Because I left it about 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I'm still there, although I must admit I've not posted for, as I was saying, about 6 months. There is. I mean, a lot more people blog now than clearly just the three of us. Which is part of the reason I don't, because it is such a crowded place to try to get through these days.
Yes.
And well, I suppose a little bit like you, I sort of just got a bit bored of it, had enough, plenty of other things to do.
Yes.
But there are, so all the things you're saying, I completely agree. That the additional piece that to me is missing within the CIPD community, also not the CIPD specifically, but HR, is some constructive debate. You know, people taking different positions and arguing their perspective. And maybe, you know, because again, Twitter's lost what it used to be, and LinkedIn's overly promotional and so on. You know, you've got, I don't know, Simon Sinek does a video, and there's lots of stuff all about how wonderful Start With Why is, and all of that sort of stuff. And then, you know, there'll be somebody else saying something completely different. And you see this at HR conferences as well, I think. You know, I'd love just to bring people together. Mark Efron, who I'm sure you know, did a wonderful piece towards the end of last year, where he identified some of the key differences that Thomas Shomoro-Premuzic was saying in terms of, I don't know, empathy and various other things. And I forgot his name. What's the Gallup guy, ex-Gallup guy?
Oh, yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah, I know who you mean.
Mr. Strengths, Marcus Buckingham.
Marcus Buckingham.
And we say, look, these two things are completely in opposition. You know, you're both getting loads of traction, loads of positive posts and comments and so on, but both these two things cannot be true. You know, I challenge you to come together and let's have a debate on it. And at least one of the speakers just never responded. And you know, I just thought, yes, this is what we need. We need to get people together in the same room, thrash things out, understand what's true, or even, because I think it can be more subtle than that as well. It's, you know, where does this apply and where does this other piece of thinking work? And that's what I'd like to see a little bit more in HR.
Well, we've always been on the same page with us. So, I mean, I know we're talking in the same bubble, but I also find that in the conferences is a good one, because I have had the pleasure, and it has a pleasure, you know, to speak at these conferences, and I always find people really friendly, really interested, but then nothing happens. And I would love to commission a PhD to study the CIPD magazine over the last 50 years. And I would bet my mortgage and your mortgage that the subjects are the same. You know.
Oh, come on, that's going a little bit too far.
Good. I'm glad. This is exactly what we need. You know, and then, you know, I'm no fan of human capital. You know, I'm up for a fight and all of that stuff. You know, certain professors stealing ideas about evidence-based HR, other ones talking about why, and you're like, come on then, guys, come on, let's have a chat about it, you know. And even, I mean, I had the funniest one I've had. I mean, it was absolutely hilarious, John. I was speaking, I can't remember. I think it was the big one in Manchester, you know, the one in the big, yeah. There was 1,000 people there, and it was great. And I mean, I was on stage with a rather talkative HR director from one of the big motor vehicle companies who was given 5 minutes and spoke for 25. And a very, very nice, funny enough, human capital consultant. And I stood up and I did just 10 minutes. And part of it was talking about bringing back welfare to the remit of HR. I said that. And then about 3 months later, I get an email saying, I can't believe somebody's suggesting that HR should be doing welfare. What a great idea. And I was like, I spent 2 frigging years of my HR career doing nothing but welfare, you know. So the whole thing seems to have, I don't know if I've got, it's gone round.
Focus on well-being at the moment. I mean, that's
exactly that.
Come right to the focus.
Exactly that. Tell me about your latest book, John. And I know it's a couple of, how long ago was it now you published it?
3
years ago.
4 years.
Yeah.
Time goes fast.
Yes.
After writing, I mean, so my first one came out in 2007.
Yeah.
And I started on the second one pretty much within sort of 6 months after finishing the first. Thought it would take a couple of years. 10 years later, over 10 years later, it came out. The third, you know, it's going to be about that timescale, I think. Blogs, wonderful, not a problem. You know, you sit down, stream of consciousness, there it is. Books I find, much harder, but very useful. I mean, in a sense, that's part of the reason why I've blogged for the last however long it is, 13 years as well. That I just find the process of writing helps my thinking.
Yes.
I mean, it's not, you know, there's various other things I do which help as well, but writing is definitely part of it. And therefore, both the books I've done, I found actually sitting down and stringing together all of my beliefs and finding out what doesn't work and where there are gaps and those sort of things. And I mean, one of my favorite models that I use now, I think I came up with on the last day I had to get the text into the publisher or something. You know, it's a really, really useful thing to do, but very draining and really hard work. And certainly, you know, if I'm going to do a book, I want it to have something new, something that I think is important and comes from a different perspective, and say things that nobody else is saying, or at least pulls different things that different people are saying together in a new way that nobody else has quite done.
Yes.
And therefore, you know, I'm not just going to sort of sit down and write. There are a set of ideas and viewpoints and case studies as well that need to come together. So I think another 5 or 6 years at least.
I find your books, they're quite, and you don't need to agree with me, quite technical. I find them particularly, this is social organization, keep me right with the names, social organization.
The social organization was the last one, yes.
That one, I thought you were years ahead. I mean, I mean, and I'd like to ask you a very direct question about that in a minute, but I thought it was a really interesting book. And unlike a lot of other books, we've maybe mentioned one already, it isn't regurgitating stuff or laying claim on stuff that you didn't come up with yourself, or where it does have stuff in it, you reference it, which is another point that I've talked about before. What would you change now in that book? I mean, that's a huge question, John, and you can't do all of that, but Is there anything in there that you think, maybe on reflection, I got that wrong, or I would tweak it a little bit?
Yeah, no, oh, absolutely. I mean, when I finished it, I was sort of thinking, there were still things that I'd have done differently, but the publisher was jumping up and down, and at some point you've sort of got to say enough is enough. I sort of thought I was sort of 95% there. There were a couple of things that I'd have wanted to change, but I was pretty proud, and it worked. It's all the different sort of aspects supported each other. It's very coherent. Yeah. So no, I was pretty happy. I mean, there's been a few things since then that I think I now think a little bit differently about, but they're tweaks. There's nothing that I'd say, when you get to page 343, just be a little bit careful about that, because that was a bit stupid. There's nothing like that. There's a couple of tweaks. So, but the big thing I got wrong, and I do write for myself, which is, never a good idea, and is probably why, my books are, you don't find them at the airports or anything. But I write to enable my thinking and sort of progress my ideas and help help organizations, help HR practitioners do what I think they should be doing. And I think there are some positives in doing that, and probably plenty of negatives as well. But yes, the social organization was sort of everything that I was interested in. And the key focus was really, so my first book, if you allow me to mention the human capital term, strategic human capital management, but very much defining human capital as the value of people, not calling people human capital. Human capital management is not managing people, it's managing people in a way that will accumulate this essential value, which is the basis of strategic success in today's world. The second book is on social capital. So not just the value of the people, but the value of the way that people connect, develop relationships, and have effective conversations that makes changes in their organizations. So that's sort of one strand. I suppose my other key interest at the time was organization design, and that's partly just because I think the social capital space has sort of evolved a lot during the 10 years that I was writing the book. We had the big social media piece. If I had written the book 7 years before, it would have been full of social media, but by the time I got around to writing it, we sort of understand most of what we're doing in that space. But you've got all of these different ideas about organization design, all these different funky models like holacracy and so on, some of which, again, we could do with a little bit more critical debate around those things as well. So I suppose I wrote the book in the context of all of those different ideas, and therefore there's a big focus on organization design within the book as well. And then it also takes the more general points around how HR can be more strategic, which I dealt with initially in the third book. I think they're three different books, really. So, they all came together because they were all things that I think are really important, I'm really interested in. I think they'd have done better as, this is the text on how HR can be strategic, first. Secondly, this is how we develop social capital rather than human capital. Thirdly, this is how you do modern organization design.
No, that's beautifully stated. I like that. It's very clear. The OD piece, the organizational design piece, one thing that I've noticed, and this might be my bubble, Jon, so I could be wrong on this, but the sort of the fractioning of HR, which has always been around, it's not new. You and I remember the IPM, don't we, and the training and all that stuff. But the fractionization of it, where you've now got quite an active OD community. I must say I've been very impressed with that community. I mean, some of the ODF, some terrific work and some of the best thinking I think I've seen in this space, probably in 20 years. I really am quite impressed with it. Are we looking at, and this is an unfair question, Jon, but but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's a good question to ask. Are we looking at the end of HR? Is it morphing finally out of itself to become an organizational design piece with a wellness piece? Because you could see it fractioning again, and there being a wellness society or a wellness group, because wellness is obviously becoming more and more. It was always important, but I think we've suddenly had it put into sharp focus, and we'll come back to that later. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, loads. I mean, it depends what you mean by HR, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, in the social organization, I say, look, you know, HR needs to take on this big agenda, but it includes a focus on digital technologies and physical workplace design and organization design and organization development and community management and all of these different things. And, you know, that might be an evolved HR, maybe this thing called human relationships. It may just be, you know, something completely different. More recently, one of the pieces that I built on the social organization was taking some of those initial models and developing a sort of beyond Ulrich HR model, suggesting how HR may look differently in the future, being built upon communities and projects and sort of more of a network-based organization. And actually, when that happens, well, you no longer have an HR department anyway, or an HR function. You know, you have a network operating across the organization with different sort of hubs within that network, and one of those hubs absolutely focuses on people, or perhaps there's a number of hubs focusing on different aspects of what we do in HR today. You know, I think that shift is definitely going to happen. Well, you know, people are more important to organizations today. You know, that's why this whole focus around well-being has increased in prominence as well, particularly over the last year. It's the same as it's the same as marketing and customers. You know, customers are more important. That doesn't mean that marketing disappeared. Marketing changed its role as businesses adapted. The same thing for HR. You know, line managers, business leaders need to take more responsibility and for what they do with people, to start building businesses around those people. As we move from functions to teams, each of those teams need to do more people management activities inside the team rather than relying on HR to do it for them. You know, all of those shifts change what HR does. But all of those shifts are partly because people are more important, and therefore, I personally don't see HR disappearing. I just think HR needs to evolve as all of those other things change as well. It's a bit. I mean, one of those other funky organizational models that I mentioned before. You know, and I mean, I think we had this conversation 10 years ago or something, sort of talking about, well, Semco was the one organization basically at a time which had a completely re-engineered approach. These days, at a push, with a little bit of time, I could probably get up to maybe 50. You know, there are a lot more organizations now which are managing their people completely differently, but it's still a really, really small pool given the total number of organizations. And so we all talk about the same ones. And sort of focus on different aspects that back up our own case. So, you know, Zappos and Holacracy, that gets trotted out all the time. I did the same in the social organization. Buurtzorg, again, everybody talks about. But I think the Buurtzorg example is really interesting here, because one of the things that a lot of people who are sort of a bit more anti-HR say is, well, you look at Buurtzorg and how amazing they are and how embedded people management is, but they have no HR function. Well, sort of, but then they have, you know, each of these self-managing teams or communities do a lot of HR work themselves. They bring in contingent expertise when they need it. They have a team of what is about 15 coaches. You know, to me, that is HR. You know, those coaches are doing what a progressive, advanced HR function would be doing, or not function, an HR discipline would be doing in an organization that was arranged that sort of way. So it's not that they don't have it. I know the CEO says they don't have HR because he hates HR, but he doesn't understand what HR should be. You know, if HR keeps on progressing, and part of the challenge, which I think is new to HR, although again been promoting it for quite some time, is this shift from best practice to best fit. You know, we need to align ourselves with what's important to a particular business. And again, as people become more important and our business strategies are based on people, and business strategies are different, and that means that the way we do people management needs to be different from organization to organization as well. It means that, you know, HR in one organization may look very different to what we do somewhere else.
Yes.
So it's not, you know, so far that sort of shift from personnel to HR has been a pretty much a sort of standard progression that all organizations have made. But now we need to start, you know, aligning in different directions and thinking how we can do things differently. And that's going to be a sort of conceptual challenge for many HR teams, I think.
I mean, I think one of the, again, I can't add anything else to that. I mean, I think the sort of the B Corps people are doing, and, you know, there are some interesting things going on out
Indeed.
there. But I mean, I personally would be difficult to convince that I've got this wrong, but I might have it wrong, as I think we're facing the end of collective bargaining, collective agreements, collective contracts. I think with the advances in technology, whether you call it AI, big data, or whatever you call it, doesn't matter what you call it. I think that's going to enable that, and that's truly transformative. I mean, that has it. I believe it could be as transformative as collective bargaining was, you know, back in the day. And when I speak about that to HR populations, they can't get their heads around it. And I think that that's an opportunity. I mean, if you're watching this and you're in HR and you haven't thought about, you know, individualization as a mode of operating, I think you're missing. There's an opportunity there, because, I mean, again, we've done it, haven't we? We had cafeteria benefits. We had, you know, all these different ways of breaking down the collective contract, the contract of employment, etc. But I think if you look at, sorry, it's such a big subject, this, but you look at employment lawyers, they're changing. More of them are now computers. It's going to be much easier to manage on an individual basis, and I think that's quite exciting. And I think, and this is where I'd like us to take this conversation now, John, because I think this is if anyone's going to watch this, this is why they're going to watch this, because I see, you know, Boris Johnston, as I said before we switched to record on, saying we're all going to flood back to the cities all across the world. I hear mainly, I have to say, if you look at the people who are writing, mainly recruiters writing articles in Fast Company and in all these other magazines, saying that's not, that, you know, we're going to go back, or it's going to be completely different based on diversity and wellness and some Hare Krishna, I don't know what the hell. I mean, it really is going crazy. Where do we think it's going to go, John? I think you need to say 5 years' time, when we look back on this, when, you know, the paradigm has shifted, because I think you can actually legitimately call this a threshold moment. You know, I think we could see something happening that hasn't happened in 70 or 80 years happening, a fundamental change in workplace practice. Have you any thoughts on that? I mean, I've got thoughts, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you think could change because of coronavirus? Massive question.
Well, it is, although one of the things which I find quite interesting is that most of the shifts, certainly so far, are things which have already been happening anyway. You know, I mean, remote work, okay, we're now doing it much more than we used to, but, you know, it was something that progressive organizations were starting to think about. More flexible working, more distributed organization, you know, that I wrote around in the social organization, not just in terms of geographically distributed, but organizationally distributed as well. So a lot of those shifts, which are now much more pronounced, were things which have been underway for a while. A lot of the things which are so the changes are much more pronounced now, but a lot of the things have been underway for quite some time, and it's a good job they have. You know, if we'd had COVID 5 years ago, before Zoom and Microsoft Teams, you know, we'd have been in a lot more trouble than we have been. So I agree that there is an opportunity for reset. At the same time, I thought there was after the global financial crisis as well, and that didn't really seem to change very much longer term. So, you know, I think we have to sort of see how things progress. But I mean, I suppose my biggest hope is the one that I've already referred to. not just me, but lots of people have been arguing that businesses are now are built upon their people. Their strategies are all around what we do with people rather than what we do with products and services. And then suddenly at the beginning of the pandemic, people came to the top of business agenda, because if we didn't look after our people and think about how they could work, then we wouldn't be in business anymore. And I think what I'm hoping is that we can now take that as a basis of the future of our organization, move forward, keep people at the top of the agenda, but also move it to a more strategic perspective. Because what we did at the beginning of the pandemic wasn't really, it was really effective. I'm so impressed with what HR managed to do, but it was a very operational reactive shift. This is what we needed to do, and we did it well and effectively. Yes. Moving beyond the pandemic, particularly if you're right that this is opportunity for a bigger reset, isn't just, it's a very different type of shift. It's a much more strategic, transformational one. But if we can keep people at the center of businesses as we move forward into that strategic piece, then I do think we've got an opportunity to do things very differently. And the big parts of that, so I think remote is going to continue. The piece that's missing for me, which again builds on the social organization, is lots of people in business are sort of talking about whether the organization as a whole returns to the workplace or not, and lots of individuals are talking about whether they as an individual want to return to the workplace. The key for me is the bit in the middle. It is the groups, the teams, the communities, the networks. So we don't need people to be in the workplace for many positions simply to work individually, but we do need to think about how teams and communities and so on work effectively, and not all of that can be done over technology. So to me, part of that blended hybrid workplace needs to be getting rid of individual workstations and thinking about the way we need to get groups and networks together physically as well as over technology. So I think remote is part of it. I do think the shift towards distributed organizations as well as distributed working is going to be part of it, not just because of remote, although remote obviously helps as well, but giving people more autonomy and connecting them differently across the organization rather than in traditional functions and teams. And then thirdly, probably the key one, which I don't think many organizations have grasped hold of yet, is if everybody is working remotely, then you don't need everybody to be, all of your employees to be sort of living around your major offices. You actually then suddenly have this big opportunity to recruit and employ people working globally. So how do you start doing that, maintaining some the key points of culture in a much more diverse distributed organization? And that's going to be a really interesting shift, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a sound case for this being the moment where, it may need government legislation, as often happens, but there is a sound case that two of the great issues of today, that being, how we work and also climate change, if you brought them together and said, well, we could incentivize the distributed organization or the remote organization by, giving them tax breaks to do it, because people have already, as you said earlier, and I thought you put it very eloquently, incidentally, people are expressing a choice now that they don't want to do the hour-and-a-half commute into central London every day. I think there's a double whammy there. A really positive thing could come of this, and maybe, I'm unashamedly wishful thinking in that front. I really hope it will happen. But I think there's another one that I'd like to ask your opinion on, that I'll tell you the whole story. I work very closely with an artist called Julian Burton, who I think you've seen some of the work that I've
absolutely, yes, of course.
Yeah, I'm very, very fond of Julian, and I think as an artist, he's a good artist, but he's actually an excellent sense maker. He picks things up, and he gets caught in things sometimes, and so do I. So it's not, we're all the same. But he said to me the other day, he said that the fundamental issue with my almost utopian perspective, and I think that's a reasonable criticism of how I'm looking at it at the moment. I give into that, but his belief is the fundamental problem is that there is a power struggle that has to be addressed, the idea of, you know, the sort of the private school culture at the top of organizations, the white privilege at the top of organizations. I am more on the, and I don't often say this, I'm more on the Jordan Peterson side of that argument than I'm on the Brené Brown side of that argument, if you know what I mean. I mean, I don't think it's as significant as what Julian is thinking it is. But I still think I might be wrong, because it's so blinking complex that I don't think anybody understands it. I certainly would never claim to. But do you have a view on that? Do you think that could be well, what do you think? I mean, is there something in that? More a philosophical question, I guess, Jon.
So I think social mobility is a big part of what organizations need to confront as part of their diversity and inclusion work. In one way, I don't think it's a huge issue. So, for example, linked to that, I'm not somebody who thinks that hierarchy needs to be abolished and we're sort of, everything is going to be networked. I write a lot about, I support organizations with network-based approaches, but to me that needs to be something that is sort of on top of existing functional hierarchical structures. My favorite book of last year was Gary Hamel's Humanocracy. Some really, really powerful ideas. But in a sense, I think he was suggesting some really interesting solutions, but I disagree with his diagnosis of the problem. A lot of his solutions he uses to try to suggest, look, at the moment, people are sort of hidden, swamped by all of these hierarchical layers in the organization. I don't see hierarchy necessarily as a big problem, or there are bigger problems in organizations that we need to confront. So sort of having a slightly different a class representation at the top of organizations, I'm not overly fussed on that, as long as everybody has sort of an equal basis to progress upwards or progress in their career. However, one of the things I am most passionate about is the way that power gets abused as part of hierarchy. But I do separate those issues. I don't think that power issues need to be a consequence of hierarchy, albeit that they are often a result of it. But that's the way we manage. That's the way we manage hierarchy rather than of hierarchy itself. So I absolutely think that we need to ensure that any power relationships in organizations, regardless of the class or anything else that are behind them, are used in a progressive, people-oriented type of way, a sort of servant leadership type approach that helps everybody progress and contribute as much as they can. That's which is a slightly different issue to the one you were describing, but that's what sort of my take on it.
I have a sort of inbuilt, I'm not comfortable with a lot of this at the moment, because it is very different. And I get slightly, my hackles go up a little bit sometimes when I spent 20 years working in what they used to call equal opportunities. Now I'm being told that it's all wrong. Well, that's not the case. Plainly, it's not the case. But the fads and some of the loud voices are suggesting that these things are really, really bad. Well, they're not. It's the best time ever to be in that environment, in the United Kingdom, certainly. And I think there's a lot to debate here. And this is where, again, what you said right at the very beginning, HR should be leading that. And what I don't see is, I don't see many HR voices in that space. I mentioned him already. I can't believe twice I'm now mentioned Jordan Peterson, and both times I'm being positive about him. That's not like me. But he highlighted that, the most egalitarian and equal societies in the world are more divided on the basis of sexuality than the ones that aren't. So you go to Scandinavia, the roles are very clearly different. So they're actually racing towards what they don't want in the media at the moment, according to that research. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's what he certainly talks about. So I think all of this is very interesting. And this is why, again, I'd love to see, again, as you suggested, some people standing up like you and I suppose, and saying, look, we need to talk about this, because I don't know the answers. I don't think you know the answers. I don't think anybody knows the answers in terms of how we do it properly. But it's a long way around to say this final point that I think on this, that I think my hope is that the weight of public opinion is such, and I'm not talking about leadership, I'm talking about public opinion, the whole thing, leaders included, will be at a different point at the end of this year than it's ever been. And that more people will say, well, look, I want to work from home 2 days a week, or I want the option to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. And I want to live in Paris, not London, or I want to, and I actually think that companies will do well adopting that attitude. I think as a strategy, would I be attracted to that? Yes, I would. Will that devastate the city of London? As I say in Scotland, I hate my doots about that. I would like to see it, but that's a whole other conversation. And that's more about capitalism rather than HR, I guess. But I think, as you again mentioned, it's more going to be more a blend, I think, more a mix than what some people are hopeful of, and maybe what I'm hopeful of.
I mean, I think strategically focused progressive employers are going to want to offer their people more flexibility. I agree with the move towards more personalized approaches. Why wouldn't you do that whilst, balancing that with a need for the business and the teams and groups that people are working in to be effective too. And that's always been what we should have been trying to do with flexibility anyway. I think I used to do quite a bit of work with Glassdoor on some of their research, and one of the most interesting pieces of work that we did was looking at comments on Glassdoor from individuals working on 0-hour contracts. Because the CIPD were suggesting that these really didn't work effectively, shouldn't be used by organisations and so on. But the research we did was very mixed. There were at that point a lot of employers using 0-hour contracts extremely progressively. So McDonald's, for example, all of their staff who were commenting on 0-hour contracts, who were on those, were saying, these allow me to work flexibly and get lots of benefits from it. You look at Sports Direct, and it's a very, very different set of comments.
Yes.
So it's not the thing itself; it's how the thing is used, and whether there is an intent for the benefit and the individual to benefit from it. And as long as that intent is there, and I think the same thing with the increasing focus on flexibility through and post the pandemic, as long as the organization looks to use remote working in a way that's going to benefit the business but will benefit the individual and the teams as well, then I think that's going to be a very positive shift. And then, as I was saying before, that broader consequence then is looking at talent in a much more global basis, and I think that's going to be a really interesting issue. And the one thing I knew, there was one other main thing I forgot to mention before, linked to that, I think the rise of contingent working, which we've been talking about for, at least sort of 5 years, and hasn't really grown to the level that people were suggesting. I do think that is something that lots of organizations are going to have another look at now, because whilst everything is sort of thrown up in the air as it has been, if you land the pieces in the most logical way to make an effective organization, then that doesn't mean that everybody needs to be employed in the way that they have been in the past.
I'd like to finish with your thoughts on a new lens that I'm seeing a lot in the media and in my own head, and I think it's true, and also it links to what you're currently doing, because you put an announcement on LinkedIn the other day, and I thought, my God, he's got another job, and I looked at it, but no, he hasn't. He's doing something different, or he's packaging it different, and I think it's very relevant to this. And what I'm hearing now is people are saying that development is the new pension. I don't know if you've come across that statement yet, but I like it, and I think I've heard that 20 years ago. It's not a new one. I'm not going to do a Simon Sinek on it and say it was me, but it's something I think was always there, but now, because of the financial environment and we're living longer, it's true, more true than it's ever been. It's always been true, but it's even more true now. You've set up an academy, Jon, is that right? Or what is it you're trying to do in the learning space?
Yeah, well, so I mean, firstly, I do agree that learning is becoming more important. Certainly there's quite a bit of research around employer branding, for example, to suggest that learning and development is a bigger and bigger piece of the way that employees think about the brands, the employment with their organizations. And I mean, I don't know, perhaps that's part of the reason why learning has been a bigger part of my portfolio. But to be honest, it's mainly COVID. So, I had a fairly broad portfolio a year ago, probably about a third consulting, a third training, a third conference speaking and other things. And pretty much all of those stopped. And I had to change something. And the change I decided to make was to be much more serious about the learning. So rather than doing that face to face, or rather than continuing to do it over Zoom, which is what I was trying to do sort of spring last year, the academy now enables me to do all of the training on strategic HR capabilities for HR practitioners that I had been doing, well, for the last sort of 5 to 10 years, but do it in a much more effective flipped digital way, where the courses are there, all the content is there, but it's sort of in the background, and enabling me to have much more discussion with people than I ever was able to do when, spending a sort of 10 till 4 o'clock day in a hotel in London or elsewhere. I mean, I do think that it's a similar sort of shift that I think organizations need to think about as well. There are other bits as well, looking at other learning experiences that I don't have the capacity to do. But that whole idea about doing learning and not just responding reactively to the pandemic, but using the opportunity to do something in a much more strategic, effective, better learning experience oriented way as well, I think is a core part of repositioning learning within employer branding and effective organizations. And I do think, particularly in HR, that needs to be done. Because we've covered a lot of ground in our conversation, but there's lots of other things going on as well. HR capability, particularly the strategic capabilities, have never been so important. And HR's never developed itself anything like enough. For years and years and years, the people coming on my courses, far the most common thing they say is that this is the first piece of training they've had for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. And, that's just crazy, stupid. And particularly over the last year, because they've been so busy and because they've not been able to go on traditional training and so on, there's been a lot less of it going on. If HR doesn't have the right strategic capabilities to drive their organizations forward, then the business might as well give up and go home. So, it's early days, but and whether somebody goes on my academy or, there are competitor models around as well. I'm not too fussed about, but I really would encourage HR practitioners to think much more seriously about the development they're getting and to use some of these new digital academies and other opportunities to sort of plug some of the holes and some of the new opportunities as well.
Well, Jon, it's been terrific speaking to you as always. That's been nearly an hour, believe it or not, just like that.
A really interesting question, Scott. I really appreciate it.
If people want to get in touch with you, Jon, where's the best place for them to find you or contact you? How's the best?
Well, I'm still fairly easily findable on social media. So I'm just Jon Ingham, Jon, no H, Jon Ingham on Twitter and LinkedIn. My main site is joningham.com, and the new academy, which I suppose I'd particularly encourage people to go and have a look at, joningham.academy.
Fine. Jon, thank you ever so much. And
pleasure.
You know what? We need to do this again, don't we? We don't need to wait another 5 years. Thanks ever so much. Thank you.
Hopefully we might even be able to have a pint again.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah. Thanks, Jon.